Hi there, students. Bitter. Bitter is one of the 5 main flavours. Bitter is something that has an unpleasant, sharp taste. Coffee is bitter. Okay, it has a bitter flavour, a bitter taste. Unsweetened chocolate is bitter. Okay, bitterness, the noun. Bitterly, the adjective. Then somebody who is bitter is angry, they're upset. They can't forget the bad things that have happened in the past. They find it difficult to get rid of this animosity from the past. They feel bitterness because they've been treated badly. They feel resentment from what has happened to them in the past. So bitterness, you are full of he was full of bitterness and anger after he lost his job. He felt bitter because he had given many years of his life to the company, and now they just threw him away. They sacked him. Okay, the bitterness of the coffee is juxtaposed by the sweetness of the sugar. Okay, so bitterness, resentment because of a bad experience. You feel that you've been unjustly treated. Yeah, this is the result of bitterness. Notice, bitter as a beer in British English is a beer that has a strong flavour of hops and a bitter taste, and it's brewed by fermentation. So you go to the pub and you say, give me a pint of bitter, please. Okay, but bitterness. Okay, the what she said betrayed the bitterness that she still feels. The lime juice gives acidity but also bitterness. The bitterness of the dispute showed what was at stake. I harbour no bitterness towards you over what happened. He expressed bitterness over being dismissed from his job without notice. So somebody's bitter is angry and upset because they can't forget. A bitter experience causes pain and anger. This was a bitter disappointment. I was bitterly disappointed. I was bitterly upset that when she left me. I learned through bitter experience that she was not to be trusted. Okay, something that's bitter, a bitter argument, a bitter fight, bitter recriminations. And then bitter weather is extremely cold, a bitter wind. Wrap up warmly, it's a bitter day outside. It's bitterly cold. So very cold, extremely cold. Bitterness. Yeah, do you still feel bitterness over what happened? Okay, there were many reasons for him to feel bitter about the actions of his bitterest enemy. The bitterness in her voice was very clear. So, bitter, a bitter flavour. Distasteful, a bitter sense of shame. Severe, a bitter experience. Bitter enemies. Bitter complaints, very reproachful. Bitter contempt. I was still bitter about not being chosen. Rancorous and cynical. Very cold, a bitter wind. Something that expresses deep pain, bitter tears. Yeah. Okay, something that you feel bitter about, that makes you feel bitter. So a bitter argument, a severe argument, an angry, fierce fight. There was bitter fighting during the war. He made a bitter attack on the Prime Minister's dishonesty. The campaign was there was bitter campaigning during the up to the election. Okay, bitterly, grievously, very hard, bitterly fought, bitterly opposed, bitterness, a feeling of grief, a feeling of anger. If somebody is bitter after a disappointing experience, they feel sad and angry and let down. They feel resentful. He bitterly he said, "That's the end, no more." Okay, grievously. A bitter experience leaves you disappointed. Yeah, you use bitter to show your feeling of disappointment, sadness, that you've been let down. Bitter weather is extremely cold. It's bitterly cold outside. It's bitterly cold in the Russian winter. And then a bitter taste. It's sharp. It's not sweet. It's slightly unpleasant. Okay, the wine has some bitter notes to it. And then bitter, a type of beer as well. So bitter. Yeah, it's every heart knows its own bitterness. I can't forget the bitterness of you're leaving me. But she feels no bitterness towards him. The rioting reflected the bitterness between the different communities in the city. He was full of hatred and bitterness. When he spoke, his bitterness showed through. His mind was scarred with bitterness. His face was contorted with bitterness and rage. Underneath the humour is an edge of bitterness. Okay, so bitter. This comes from an old English word, bitter, bitterness, talking about grief or sadness. So bitter, 5 informality, bitterness, 5 informality, use anywhere. So bitter, bitterly, bitterness.